Those workers are so new. Here you see moving in a colony of Camponotus castaneus into a mini hearth. Right here I'm prepping the interior, so you don't actually add water into the water tower at first, because when you're moving around your mini hearth, you don't want that water to slosh around and maybe dump out and flood your chamber. You want to keep it nice and level. So I add a little water to the flooring and it soaks in. It keeps the humidity nice and high, and then filling up the nest mate and attaching that should be really the best way to get started before moving in your colony. This was really easy to move that queen in. I just put her on my hand, and she moved right in. So I moved her in first. I wanted her in the main chamber. This colony was in the middle of diapause, which is a fancy word, the technical term for what ants do in the wintertime. So a lot of people call it hibernation. And then I dumped her workers and the eggs into the foraging area. So dumping is technically not the best way to move your ant colonies. Most of the time it is best to be patient with them, connect them up to your habitat using tubing, depending on what you have them in and what you're moving them into, it kind of changes. But dumping is not always the best way to go. They've moved in quickly, as you can see. We'll get into a little bit more about dumping here in a little bit. So this is kind of a typical scene of what you would expect to see from a mini Camponotus species. They like to hang from the ceiling. I'm not sure why, but that's a pretty cool feature of the mini hearth. This one also has a glow feature. It's phosphorescent material, so it will glow in the dark like this. And you can charge that up using a black light or a regular light. It takes about 30 minutes to charge up, and then once it's charged, it lasts for about 5 hours before there's all the light's gone off of that. It does not seem to bother these ants, and it may vary from species to species, but so far so good. And we're moving on. We're going to move in some more Camponotus colonies here. We've got 3, 2 in the test tubes and 1 in a devolved chamber, and then we're moving them all into mini hearths. So I want to give everybody a good view of different approaches to moving them in from different setups. They're pretty similar with some differences. So here we're going to start off with the devolved chamber queen, moving her in first. And I use barbecue skewers a lot. Those are wooden sticks. You can get them a pack of 150 or 100 at the grocery stores for $1, $2. They're really, really handy for ant keeping. Use them for lots of stuff. So basically I will tease her out. I will put that skewer right up under her legs, and she'll just grab hold of it. Sometimes it looks like it's almost accidental. She can't help it. She's got claws on her legs. So then I'll pop a little container over her so she doesn't go anywhere, and move her eggs in. I want to separate her from the eggs, so she gets really aggressive when she sees something messing with her eggs. So this stops her from spraying formic acid. And then I move her eggs in, dump the dry ones in, and then slowly move in the eggs, the wet eggs, the smaller ones, with a barbecue skewer. See the rolling action back and forth there? That's how I get the eggs off of my barbecue skewer, just kind of sliding them off. And then when you've got all your eggs in, this is just my method of doing this. I put the mini hearth up to the edge of the table and kind of get her to walk in. Some go in a lot easier than others, but once they're in, they really like that kind of interior feeling of the mini hearth, that cave-like feeling, and they typically go right in and don't come back out. So the second one we're moving in here, actually this is the third one. What we're going to do is prep it with some Fluon. So real quickly off camera here, we'll coat the top of this with Fluon. You can't really see it there, but you'll see it in a minute when it dries. And now this is the second one that we're moving in. This is one from a test tube. Again, no workers yet in this one, but very close. And we're just going to tease her out with a barbecue skewer from a test tube. And it's just basically the idea here is getting that barbecue skewer to kind of curl up under her legs, and then they just automatically hold and grab on, and you pull her out, separate her from her eggs, keep her safe somewhere. That's the most important thing, keeping her safe somewhere. And then dump her eggs. The dry eggs just kind of slide right out. Again, you're not filling the water tower in the mini hearth yet, because you don't want that to dump and slosh around and make it really wet and difficult to handle. So we got a bunch of eggs in there. Now we're going to get the wet eggs out, put them also on the water tower, and again that kind of rolling action to get them off of the barbecue skewer. Sometimes you need to stick the barbecue skewer in some water if they won't stick. Now we have a colony with workers. We are going to move this colony in, similar to how you saw us move the Camponotus castaneus red carpenter ant colony in first. We're basically just going to dump them in. And as you can see, there's the Fluon around the top edges of that container. It's a whitish liquid when it dries, a little cloudy, but it stops them from climbing out, keeps them safe in this condition. Sometimes it keeps you safe if you've got fire ants, but Fluon's a really effective material and good accessory to have if you're keeping ants. So now we've moved in 3 soon-to-be colonies. 1 colony already has some workers. Last thing we want to do is make sure we don't forget to do this. We fill up the water towers. Don't have to fill them up all the way. Here I'm just probably about 10 to 12 milliliters in each one. It's a 15 milliliter capacity water tower. And then the queens, they really settle right in and they start moving their eggs, getting comfortable. Usually they'll stay right on top of the water towers. Now this colony may take a couple of days to move down. It just depends. They're all a little different. The other one that I had moved earlier in the day, they moved in within a few minutes. The queen was down the hole and the workers started moving in the eggs very quickly. Just be patient. So if you got ants this small, I'm just showing them as an example. These are smaller ants. This queen's probably about a quarter of the size of that Camponotus queen. These small nantics are probably, again, a quarter, maybe smaller than those other workers that you just saw in the Camponotus colony. You would not really want to dump them in too much if it was a really small colony like this. This is one where you would want to wait for the workers to develop. You would want 10, 20 workers at minimum of small ant species to move into a mini hearth, like just by dumping. Now, you can sometimes connect them up to the test tube, from a test tube to a mini hearth, from a test tube to some other habitat that you want them to move into, and they'll do it on their own, but that's the best way to go because they're using their chemical trails to communicate with one another, and that way they can move in slowly and do what's best for the colony instead of dumping them into an area that really stresses them, and then all of a sudden they've lost all of their kind of roadmap as far as their trails of where to go, where is safe, where is food. I find that that's really important for young colonies to not dump them, especially small ants, into larger areas. So I usually wait 10 to 20 workers minimum, sometimes much more, before you want to try to move them out of their starting habitat. And so this is a Camponotus Americanus colony, and the reason I'm showing you this is because this is kind of an example of what you can see. This, just a few minutes before I dumped this colony into this mini hearth, and the queen, before I turned around to get the lid, and I turned back around, and she was already gone down the hole, which is kind of a natural inclination. That's what they do. They find a hole and they just dive into it. That's what they do as far as going down and finding a founding chamber. So she followed her instincts, found the hole, and went straight into it. One of the workers followed her, and then this worker, all by herself, is moving all of the eggs in, and that's a good sign. So the only reason I moved in this small colony, I didn't wait for a while, is because I had some mold developing in that test tube, and I wanted to get them out. This is kind of a prize colony for me, the only one of its kind I've ever had. They're really, really elusive around where I'm from. People up north and around Michigan area, I hear that they find bunches of these, and they're quite common. But here, they're pretty elusive. This is the only small colony I've ever seen in this area of North Carolina. So pretty exciting. So you can see this worker's done all the work all by herself. She is moved all the eggs down below. She continues to travel back and forth, and she will probably do this many, many more times before she stops. That chemical trail will eventually fade, and she'll realize all of that work is done. All the eggs are down below, and then they'll start to make this their home. That's typical to see. These colonies will set up right on the water tower. Nothing wrong with that. It's just where the best humidity is. They seem very comfortable in that type of arrangement. Some other things to consider when you're moving colonies into mini hearths, like as I said before, is the size of the colony. A lot of people will get into this habit of putting queens in test tubes, and then they'll want to move one into another habitat, when the queen's already got eggs. And that's okay, but I always say wait until you have, like you see here, a good amount of larvae that are larger and a good amount of pupae. Then it's time to go ahead and move them into, if you have a mini hearth or an inception chamber or another habitat that maybe you've made on your own. Wait until those eggs are easy to move, but also you want to wait, and you don't want to wait too long, and go ahead and do it before the workers arrive, because once they close, that's what their home is. That's where the smells begin, as far as them doing their first chemical trails around that area. So it seems to be that if you go ahead and move the queen in before the first workers arrive, that everything kind of goes more smoothly from that aspect, and you don't have to worry about moving them and them having two new homes so early on. So, and she finally found the last pupae, and I hope this colony does really well. It's a beautiful species. They have black heads and red bodies, so they look like a combination of our other two common species here, Camponotus castaneus and Camponotus chromaides.